welcome back to Casual MMA. This episode, we're going to continue our coverage of UFC 277 and break down all the fights on the prelim card. If you haven't checked out our early prelim breakdowns, check the description for a link.
Who do we have here on the lightweight fight?
Yeah, so the first matchup in the prelims for UFC 277 is going to be Drakkar Klose versus Rafa Garcia. Drakkar Klose is 12-2-1. Rafa Garcia is 14-2. And as we can see, Drakkar Klose is currently about a 2-1 favorite as of this recording at minus 220. Drakkar is a little bit older at 34, where Rafa's only 27. And while Drakkar does have a 2-inch height advantage, he has the same reach at 70 inches as Rafa Garcia.
Also seems like they have the same stance too, which is orthodox, right?
Yep, both of these guys are orthodox fighters, both really balanced fighters as well. Rafa Garcia struggled early on with his striking, but he's definitely shown improvements there. But both guys like to mix in striking as well as wrestling and really take a balanced approach.
All right, let's start with Rafa Garcia, I guess. What do we know about him here?
Yeah, so Rafa Garcia, like I said, 14-2, although he is the underdog in this fight. He's 3-2 in his last 5 fights. He only has one finish. It was a submission against Jesse Ronson. So, really, if you look at his fights, he has been pretty busy, all 5 of his fights coming since 2020, but has kind of struggled at points. When he was fighting Nasrat Haqparast, he was clearly not on Nasrat's level of striking, although, in that fight, Nasrat was a minus 550 favorite, so Garcia was expected to lose the fight. And it was a grappler versus striker matchup, and it ended up being a stand-up battle, and as expected, Garcia just kind of was outclassed. After that, he fought again and lost by decision again. He did look good for the first few minutes of the fight, but he really gassed out early on, and he tried to mix in some takedowns to keep the fight close, but eventually, it was just too much, and he did end up losing. So then he was able to turn it around. He has won 2 in a row. He had a win over Natan Levy, who was actually making his UFC debut in 2020. Natan Levy had gotten his contract on the Dana White's Contender Series in 2020, and he was making his debut against Rafa Garcia. Honestly, that fight was really close. Levy did look a little bit crisper on the feet, but Rafa did show improved striking as well, and he was able to mix in his grappling to come away with the win. After that, he did fight Jesse Ronson. It was Ronson's second fight in the UFC, but it was coming off a long layoff because in his UFC debut, although Ronson did come away with the victory, he later tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs and couldn't fight. So this was his comeback fight after, I want to say, 20 months off. So he hadn't been fighting in a long time. But, Garcia did look really good. He dominated the fight, mixing takedowns and striking, and then ended up getting the submission early in the round. So he ended up with a second-round submission there.
Moving on to the favorite, with the record of 12-2-1, what do we know here about his past fights?
Yep, so for Drakkar Klose, he's 4-1 over his last 5 fights. Only one finish, it was by knockout, so he's been going to decision a lot as well. He's been in the UFC since 2017 with 8 fights over those 5 years, but he's only fought twice since 2020. Once in 2020, and then recently in April. So that's a big gap. He lost his fight by TKO in 2020. but that was to Beneil Dariush, who is actually one of the best lightweights in the world right now. He was supposed to fight Islam Makhachev. There was an injury. Islam Makhachev is now fighting for the lightweight title instead. There was a lot of people actually arguing that Beneil Dariush should be the one fighting for the title. So you can't really fault him for losing to Beneil. Not to mention, it was actually a really exciting fight. Right before he was knocked out, he actually was the one who hurt Beneil Dariush. And, somehow Beneil Dariush just was like, okay, I'm almost unconscious, so I'm just going to hit you as hard as I can over and over again, and ended up turning the tables. Yeah. So, a super exciting fight, and it also, a super, very talented opponent. So, can't really hold that against him that much. And then he did come back with a round two TKO win over Brandon Jenkins. Jenkins is 0-2 in the UFC, and Close was a massive favorite in this fight. So, really, it depends on how much you think you can take out of that fight, given that his opponent was definitely of lesser quality than, someone like Dariush. But he did look good in the fight. He had some good grappling, and then decided just to switch his striking and just unloading on his opponent. And he almost knocked him out in the first round, but it went to the second round. The second round didn't last long before he got the finish.
Mm. So, who do you think would win this fight? Since they have the records are not that are pretty close. So
Yeah, I think it's hard to say. They're both very balanced. I definitely think Drakkar Klose is the favorite for a reason. I think he probably will win the fight. I don't think I'd bet on him with a minus 220 line because, you got to bet a lot to make a little in that case. But I do think he gets the job done. I think he's very balanced. He has a really good clinch game, which Garcia has shown past, even though he's a submission specialist with 8 submissions in his career. He really he's had troubles since he's gotten to the UFC getting his opponent to the ground. So I feel like at that point, Drakkar Klose is going to be able to decide where the fight takes place. And if he can do that, then I think that'll be enough for him to come away with the win.
Cool. Moving on to the heavyweight, who do we have here?
Yeah, so the heavyweight fight is going to be Dontel Mays versus Hamdi Abdel Wahab. Abdel Wahab. So this is actually a late notice replacement. Dontel was originally supposed to fight Justin Tafa, but both fighters that he was scheduled to fight, obviously it's a heavyweight division. These are big guys who are just looking to knock you out. So not much of a matchup change for him. And for Hamdi, it's a great opportunity to come in on short notice. He has 5 professional fights. 2 of them are actually bare-knuckle fighting with Jorge Masvidal's promotion. So we've actually seen some really interesting things here with the betting line as well, because it's flipped dramatically. Yesterday, so on Tuesday, July 26th, ESPN was reporting the odds that Dontel Mays was a plus 160 underdog, and flipped that around to Wednesday, and now he's a minus 165 favorite. So that means you got a lot of people coming in and saying, like, hold on, this, yes, Hamdi Abdel Wahab is 5-0, but who has he fought? He doesn't have enough experience. We don't know enough about him. Yeah. And people are now starting to come in and bet on Dontel Mays. Both fighters are still pretty young in their careers, 30 and 29. But there's a huge, huge reach advantage for Dontel Mays. 81 inches to 73, that's a 9-inch reach advantage. We'll see if he can put his experience and combine that with his reach advantage to kind of overwhelm Hamdi in his UFC debut.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's see. The Dantel's last 5 fights here.
Yeah, so for Dontel Mays, he's 3-2 in his last 5, with his losses coming in 2019, late 2019 and mid 2020. So he's on a 2-fight win streak. He has 2 knockouts in his last 5 fights. One in his most recent fight, where he got Josh Parisian in a crucifix, and then just elbowed him in the face until the ref had to stop it. And then the other one was in 2019, actually, when he was on the Dana White Contender Series. So he was fighting a ground specialist. Mays did a really good job keeping the fight on his feet, and landed a massive hook, was able to drop his opponent, and he followed him to the ground for the finish. I think one thing that's really interesting to look at here is his loss in 2019 to Cyril Gane. Cyril Gane recently fought for the heavyweight championship. So similar to our last fight where one fighter had a loss to Beneil Dariush, Dontel Mays had a loss to Cyril Gane, who's also a high-level competitor. Now the interesting thing about this is he lost by submission. This was really early in Gane's MMA career. He's actually more known as a kickboxer at this point, and there was a lot of questions about his ground game. So, yes, he lost to a really talented opponent, but there is kind of some worry there if Cyril Gane was able to get that submission when he was that green in wrestling and jiu-jitsu, what kind of defense he has once it actually gets to the ground. Not to mention his loss after losing to Cyril Gane was also a submission loss, and he was a step behind Nascimento the entire fight and then ended up getting submitted. So there's definitely some questions. He did show some good some good takedown defense in his Dana White Contender Series match, but it has, kind of been the case that if he does get taken down, he can be in a risky position.
Okay, and how about his opponent? I know we might not know much about him, but how about his last 5 fights? What happened?
Yeah, so he is 5-0. So all of his fights are in his last 5 fights, and they're all really, really quick. So all 5 of his fights have happened since the 1st of October, 2021. So that's less than 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
So really impressive. You can actually see some of the footage on YouTube of his fights, but it's not a lot to go on because he gets round 1 TKOs really early in most of his fights. So definitely this will be interesting. He does have one fight that went to the 3rd round, but it'll be interesting to see how he handles the big step up in competition. Plus, it's on short notice. We don't really know how much he's been preparing, but given his fight record, and he fought just here in June, I'm sure he's ready to go, and I'm sure he's excited for the chance to, take a crack at a UFC opponent.
Cool. I noticed that is 10-4 to 5-0. Do you know who's gonna win here? Can you pretty much say that it's gonna be Mays?
I definitely don't think you could say that. First of all, any heavyweight fight can be over at any second because, the big guys have so much power. It's so easy for them to get a knockout with one punch. And I think Hamdi definitely, based on his record, has that capability. I do think Mays' experience and that reach advantage give him the edge. I think he will be the better fighter overall. So if he can, keep his game plan going, I think he does come away with a win, but definitely not a guarantee by any means.
All right. Moving on to the next fight on the prelims card, which is the lightweight between Drew Dober and Rafael Alves. What's the stat here?
Yeah, so Drew Dober is 24-11. He does also have a no contest on his record. And then Rafael Alves, 20-10. So these guys, a lot of experience. That is, both of them have over 30 pro fights. So that, is one factor. They're not that old, though. Drew Dober, 31, and Rafael Alves is 33. But Drew Dober is the minus 210 favorite, so that's a 2-1 favorite. I think as we talk through these fights, I do agree with that line, and it hasn't changed much over the week, which means a lot of people agree with it as well. They're both the same height, but Drew Dober does have a 2-inch reach advantage, and he'll be fighting southpaw. So once again, we see that southpaw versus orthodox battle that will take place during the match.
Cool. Let's look at Drill's last 5 fights here.
Yeah, so Drew Dober, first of all, like I said, he has a lot of experience. In his 24 wins, he has 11 knockouts and 6 submissions, so he can do it everywhere. He has been favoring knockouts of late with 3 knockouts in his last 5 fights. And those are his 3 wins in his last 3 fights, as he's 3-2 over that span. He has fought, we mentioned earlier, Nasrat Haqparast. Drew Dober actually was able to knock him out. Nasrat is he's 2-2 since that fight, but he's been, considered one of the up-and-coming prospects in the UFC. So getting a TKO win there is impressive. He also fought Alexander Hernandez, who both him and Nasrat, when Drew Dober fought them, were 11-2. So really he's, taking on these up-and-coming prospects. Hernandez has also gone 2-2 since his loss to Drew Dober. But kind of the same boat, where people, have been looking at him as a prospect, and so it's early in his career. We'll see if it ends up coming to fruition. During that fight, Alexander Hernandez did have a close first round, but Drew Dober definitely had the edge, and he ended up putting it on him in round 2, getting the TKO late in the round, but was able to hurt him multiple times before that happened. If we look at the next fight, Islam Makhachev, round 3 submission loss. So I mentioned Islam already earlier in the show when we were talking about Beneil Dariush, but Islam Makhachev is fighting in October for the lightweight championship. So losing in 2021 to Islam Makhachev is not anything to be ashamed of. Drew Dober was a plus 340 underdog in the fight. Islam pretty much took him down and held him down the entire fight until he was able to get that submission in round 3. Drew Dober did have some good scrambles, but eventually, it just wasn't enough. Honestly, in 2021, getting into round 3 with Islam Makhachev was impressive enough. He's fought other people that are really talented, such as Dan Hooker, who didn't even make it out of the first round. He also lost to Brad Riddell, who's a rising prospect. Brad Riddell was 9-1 at the time. So he's lost since that fight. He's lost 2 in a row, but it's been against good opponents. Drew Dober was actually able to drop Riddell early in the fight and win the first round, but it seemed like he was hurt at the end of the first round, and he really never came back and ended up losing a decision. Then earlier this year, he got a round 1 knockout over Terrence McKinney, another rising prospect, 12-3. And Dober actually got dropped twice in the first 30 seconds, and the fight almost got ended. But then he landed a massive knee, and that changed the fight. He got the TKO win.
And Rafael Alves, I know he has fought like 30 times already, but let's focus on his last 5 fights here.
Yeah, for his last 5 fights, it actually takes him before he was in the UFC. He fought on Dana White Contender Series in August of 2020. So he did have a submission win and a TKO win in Titan FC prior to that in 2018 and 2019. But if we look, starting with his Dana White Contender Series match, he is currently 2-1 in his 3 fights since 2020. So when he was on the Dana White Contender Series, he was fighting a 17-2 opponent, Alejandro Flores. It was pretty close, honestly, through the first 2.5 rounds. But as happens a lot on the Contender Series, you need to prove a point and get the finish. And so right at the end of the fight, he was able to find his neck and choke him out. After that, he came and lost to a decision to Damir Ismagulov. Ismagulov was 22-1, so definitely no shame in losing there. Damir Ismagulov was also a 6-1 favorite to win the fight. Surprisingly, though, Alves got a knockdown really early in the fight and jumped guillotine. The issue was that once Ismagulov was able to get out, he kind of dominated the whole fight. Alves didn't have enough output on the feet and really just wasn't able to compete with Damir on the ground. So he did win the 3rd round, but it was too little too late at that point. After that, he fought Mark Diakesi, and he got him hurt really early. Mark tried to clinch with him, and as Alves is known to do, if you try to clinch, he's going to grab your head and he's going to choke you out. And so round 1 guillotine, that was it. The fight was over.
Well, both of them are pretty experienced. They're not new to the octagon at all. If you can only pick one, you think who's going to win here?
Yeah, like I said in the beginning, I do think that Drew Dober is deserving of his 2-1 favorite status. His 2 losses in his last 5 fights are to good opponents. He has a really tough chin. He's gotten hurt in the past, which Rafael Alves is definitely capable of doing. But it is really hard to get Drew Dober out of there. I think he's a well-balanced fighter, and I think he is going to be able to come out with a win. His competition has definitely been at a higher level than Alves has. But that's not to say that Alves doesn't have a chance. He has explosive power, and he has really good jiu-jitsu as well. One thing that might either win him the fight or seal his loss is if he decides to jump guillotine, which he likes to do, and he burns his arms out early in the fight, then Drew Dober is probably going to have his way with him. One prediction I do have for this fight is I don't think there's a likelihood that this one goes the distance. I think somebody's getting a finish, and we'll have to see who it is.
Wow, that sounds like it's gonna be an interesting fight to watch. Last but not least, the last fight on the prelims is welterweight. Who do we have?
Yeah, so our last prelim fight, the featured prelim of the night, is Alex Morono versus Matthew Semmelsberger. Semi the Jedi is his nickname. Pretty awesome there. Matthew Semmelsberger is the favorite at minus 155. He's only 29, Morono being 31. Semmelsberger has a 2-inch height advantage and a 3-inch reach advantage. He also does switch his stance as he fights, so he might be able to mix that in for an advantage as well.
Well, the record is pretty different here though, since for Alex he has like 21-7. Do you think that's gonna be an advantage for him?
Yeah, so Alex Morono does have more fights overall, and Matthew Semmelsberger definitely is the younger guy, the newer prospect. I'm not sure if it definitely can give him an advantage, but I think it's going to be a tough fight either way.
How about his last 5 fights?
Yeah, so Alex Morono is 4-1 in his last 5 fights. It sounds great. He has 1 knockout over that span, and that's his only finish. So he's been in the UFC since 2016, so that speaks to that experience part that you mentioned. Having 15 fights over the last 7 years. He's 3-1 in his last 4, and 4-2 since the start of 2020. So, he's been very active, especially recently. He has 2 decision wins, a KO win, and a decision loss over that span since 2020. If we look at that, if we look at his fights, though, my big question is, even though he's been in the UFC for a long time, who's he fought recently and how are they doing at this point in their career? So, 4 fights ago in December of 2020, he fought Anthony Pettis. Very respected name, Anthony Showtime Pettis. Pettis was 23-1 and 10 at the time. So what really hurts Morono in this case is that he lost to Pettis. He did have a good first round. He was able to land a few good shots and take Pettis' back, but it was back and forth for the second half of the round, and after that he got outstruck and outgrappled and ended up losing a decision. And he almost got finished in the fight. Now, like I said, Pettis is a respected name, but this was Pettis' last fight in the UFC. Even though Pettis won, he chose to leave and go to the PFL. And since joining the PFL, he's 1-3. So, that kind of gives you pause on what you can take out of that fight. Then he did get a round 1 TKO win over Cowboy Cerrone. Once again, Cowboy Cerrone, very respected. He is a legend in the sport. He just retired. The issue is that even though Cowboy was 36-15 at the time, this was Cowboy's 5th loss in a row. And after that fight, he would lose again and end up retiring just recently. So, yeah, he got the knockout, but it was against a guy who essentially was on a 6-fight losing streak. Then he was able to fight on a short notice fight against David Zawada and get the unanimous decision win. Once again, he got the unanimous decision win. The guy was 17-6, which isn't a bad record, but after the loss to Morono, Zawada was cut from the UFC. He was 1-4 in the UFC over his stint with the organization. It was a solid win, pretty much all stand-up, but like I said, what's the quality there on a guy who clearly wasn't cut out for the UFC? Or at least at the time. I'm not going to say he can't make a comeback. Hope he does. But 1-4 for this stint in the UFC, not great. Once again, if we move to his most recent fight in December of 2021, he was fighting Mickey Gall, who's 7-3. Mickey Gall came to the UFC very early. Had issues with his striking capabilities, really good grappler. Gall is 1-3 in his last 4 fights. So once again, not a very good record here recently. And Morono was able to drop him with a jab, so that's impressive. But Gall was also able to hurt him a bit. So, Morono did come away with the win, but his opponent, not that good of a striker, still was able to do some damage, and he's 1-3 in his last 4 fights. So, yeah, his record's good, 3-1 in his last 4. But his competition, while respectable opponents, were at bad spots in their career. And only one of them is still in the UFC, and that guy's on a 2-fight losing streak. So, he has 21 wins. He's only 31 years old. He has potential, but I'm definitely not sold on him at this point.
Well, how about his opponent? What's his record here?
Yeah, so Matthew Semmelsberger is 10-3, 4-1 in his last 5. Those were his 5 fights in the UFC. So going back to his UFC debut, he's more of a knockout artist, for sure, with 6 knockouts and 1 submission of his career, 2 knockouts in his last 5 fights. Like I said, he has 5 fights in the UFC, dating back to August 2020. So he's been pretty busy during this pandemic portion of the UFC, and his most recent fight back in March. So he did have a unanimous decision winner over Carlton Minus. Minus was 10-1 at the time of the fight, but kind of similar thing we saw with Morono. Minus is 1-3 in his last 4 fights. He's no longer in the UFC, but Semmelsberger was the underdog in the fight, so credit to him for overcoming that. It was a dominant win. He was even given a 10-8 round by one of the judges in round 2. I disagree with the judge that gave him that, but he was definitely better on the feet in that fight, and he mixed in the ground game as well. So it was a solid win. After that, he got a round 1 knockout of Jason Witt. It was a nice counter right KO. There was only 16 seconds into the fight. Witt tried to kick him in the leg, and he just knocked him out clean. If you haven't watched it, it only takes 16 seconds. Go check it out.
Cool.
He also lost a unanimous decision to Chaos Williams back in June of 2021. Interesting note here is that Alex Morono got knocked out by Chaos Williams in his UFC debut. So common opponent, about a year apart. They both lost to him though, although Morono got knocked out early and Semmelsberger was able to take it to a decision. Most people think that Semi the Jedi won the second round, so it wasn't a huge blowout. But he got hurt a couple times, and he just really needed to be more active if he wanted to stand a chance against Chaos. After that, he had another flash knockout of 15 seconds against Martin Sano. So once again, if you haven't watched that, go check it out. It takes 15 seconds. It was Martin Sano's UFC debut and 3rd loss in a row, and he hadn't fought since 2017. So, as impressive as it is, you have to take it with a grain of salt in terms of how impressive it was. And then his most recent fight was against AJ Fletcher in March. AJ Fletcher was making his UFC debut, but unlike his previous opponent, was not on a 3-fight losing streak. He's actually 9-0, undefeated. He's known for his wrestling, and pretty much the consensus was that AJ Fletcher won the first round, but Semmelsberger was able to make a comeback and take the fight with a unanimous decision. Semmelsberger, like I said, he did lose the first round. He got taken down early and was trying to fight off a choke. He just kind of sat on his back, not really trying to get up. So definitely not a great start to the fight. He was able to... he also got taken down in round 2, but he was able to reverse it in that round and got some good ground control. He was trying to land ground and pound, landed some good shots. That definitely sealed him the round. And then he sealed the round by actually taking Fletcher down in the 3rd round and holding him there, although he didn't do a whole ton with it. So, he's had a couple of opponents that were also pretty weak, but definitely against AJ Fletcher is a tougher opponent. He definitely has shown that his right cross is incredibly powerful. And Morono has a tendency to throw these wild looping shots without really any defense, so to say. So Matthew Semmelsberger definitely has a chance to land a counter and possibly get one of those knockouts there.
With the last fight on the prelims, can you predict who's gonna win here?
Yeah, so I'm going to go with the odds again on this one. I think Semmelsberger has earned his minus 155 as the favorite. Morono has been improving every single fight, and we haven't seen him in 7 months. So, maybe he has put it all together, but even last time we saw him, he has this tendency to just throw with reckless abandon, kind of lowering his head and just throwing hook after hook. So, while that's fun to watch, it's definitely dangerous, and I think Semmelsberger is a more technical fighter. I think it's going to take place mostly on the feet, but I definitely think both fighters will try to mix in some takedowns. I think Semmelsberger has the edge here, So I think I have him winning this one. That concludes our UFC 277 prelim fight breakdown. Thanks for watching.
Please don't forget to like and subscribe our YouTube channel to see our main card breakdown later this week. And please don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next episode.